Hey there, 8th graders, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're diving into a document I know you've heard a lot about, the Declaration of Independence. But I want you to wipe that image of a dusty old piece of paper right out of your mind. We aren't just looking at ancient history today. We are looking at a living, breathing catalyst for justice and equality. We're going to explore how the words written back in 1776 actually became a powerful, unstoppable tool that inspired generations of heroes to stand up, fight against injustice, and demand that America actually live up to its highest ideals.
Here's the rundown of what we're tackling today. America's original promise, abolitionists and the Declaration, suffragists demanding the vote, the Declaration as a powerful tool for reform, and finally, education and biblical morality. Let's get right into it.
Section 1, America's Original Promise. To really wrap our heads around the incredible power of the Declaration of Independence, we kind of have to look at it as an unfinished masterpiece. Think about 1776. On one hand, you have this beautiful, groundbreaking promise of equality, the idea that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, right? But on the exact same day, in the exact same country, there was this harsh, unavoidable reality of deep, systemic injustice. Millions of people were held in slavery, entirely stripped of their most basic human rights. Women were completely boxed out of the political process. So the founders set this incredibly high bar for what the country was supposed to be, but the reality for so many was pure oppression. It was a glaring, undeniable contradiction.
Which brings us to the moral baseline for everything we're looking at today. It's beautifully captured in Proverbs 31, verse 8. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. You see, just spotting a contradiction isn't really enough, is it? We actually have a foundational, God-given duty to challenge that injustice. We are called to be a voice for the voiceless and to fight for the rights of those who have been pushed to the margins. And honestly, that is exactly what the brave reformers of the 1800s understood and put into practice.
Section 2. Abolitionists and the Declaration. Let's fast forward a bit to the 1800s. First, we need to clearly define what the abolition movement actually was, so we can see how these courageous heroes took the words of the founders and flipped them into a powerful moral weapon. Simply put, abolition was the movement to fight for justice and completely end the practice of slavery in the United States. These were men and women who dedicated their entire lives to wiping out a deeply entrenched, horrific system of human bondage. And to win that fight, they needed every single intellectual and moral tool they could get their hands on.
Enter the great Frederick Douglass. Now, this is a man who literally had to teach himself to read, in secret, and he brilliantly used the very foundation of the country to expose its greatest sin. Douglass didn't just stand up and complain about unfairness. He strategically pointed right at the ideals of the Declaration to show everyone that slavery wasn't just a political debate, it was a total fundamental violation of America's core values. I mean, he powerfully called out the massive hypocrisy of a nation that threw parades to celebrate its own liberty while simultaneously holding millions of people in brutal slavery. He basically held a mirror up to America, using its own words. All right, time to put your thinking caps on, because here is a question for your homework. How exactly did the abolition movement connect itself directly to 1776? Think about what we just discussed. They weren't trying to tear down the country or start a brand new nation from scratch. No, they were actively demanding that the original promise made in 1776 actually be kept. They were looking at the country and saying, look, you wrote these words, now it is time to live up to them. Keep that thought in your back pocket as you work on your assignments.
Moving on to Section 3, Suffragists Demand the Vote.
To really understand the next major wave of reformers who stepped up to demand the nation live up to its ideals, let's define our terms again. Suffrage. It's simply the movement to win the right to vote for women. For a huge chunk of American history, women literally had zero voice in the laws that governed them. The suffrage movement was that organized, deeply passionate fight to finally gain that voice and achieve true political equality.
Think back to the original 1776 text. The famous line reads, "All men are created equal." But a brilliant women's rights leader named Elizabeth Cady Stanton took those exact words and tweaked them just a bit. She boldly declared, "All men and women are created equal." It's such a simple addition, right? But it carried absolute earth-shattering power. She wasn't rejecting the Declaration. She was expanding it to make it actually true.
Stanton's absolute genius was taking this adapted language and using it to firmly demand that women be explicitly included in the nation's core promise of equality. By taking a document that every single American totally revered and inserting women directly into the center of its promise, suffragists made it practically impossible for anyone to argue against them. Because if you argued against them, you were basically arguing against the Founding Fathers. They used the nation's most sacred text to demand their fundamental right to vote.
Section 4. A powerful tool for reform.
Okay, so we've talked about abolitionists and we've talked about suffragists, but before I give away the final answers, I want to ask you directly, why was the Declaration such a powerful tool for both of these completely distinct movements? I mean, why did different groups, fighting entirely different battles, decades apart, keep going back to this exact same document? Think about the why behind its incredible historical power. What made it so undeniably effective at shaking up the status quo?
Well, here is the breakdown. First, the Declaration provided a rock-solid moral argument that opponents just couldn't dismiss. You couldn't just brush it off, because it was the literal foundation of the country. Second, it proved these movements were actually fulfilling America's original promise, not just launching some radical new rebellion. And third, these reformers were simply trying to extend the exact same rights and freedoms promised in 1776 to all citizens. They used the nation's own words to prove their fight was just. And you know what? It worked.
And finally, Section 5. Education and biblical morality.
So the really crucial point here is how all of this history applies to you today, right now in your own life and in your own studies. And this brings us right to the core philosophy of what we do here in the HeroesMart Academy Godly Learners series. Simply put, education without morality will hurt. You can absolutely be the smartest person in the room. You can know all the historical dates, ace every math formula. But what is the point of being highly educated if you completely lack a moral compass? If you're super smart but you're making choices that hurt yourself and hurt others, then your education has kind of failed you. Think about it. The people who upheld slavery and denied women the vote, a lot of them were highly educated, but their education lacked morality.
And this is exactly why we intertwine biblical morality with your education. Romans chapter 8, verses 6 and 7 promises true peace of mind to everyone who keeps their mind spiritual. The ability to look at the world, spot injustice, and actually have the courage to fight for what is right, just like Frederick Douglass and Elizabeth Cady Stanton did, that comes from having a spirit grounded in truth. When you mix your education with biblical morality, you don't just get knowledge. You gain wisdom, real peace of mind, and the actual ability to be a true force for good in this world.
I want to wrap up our explainer today with a final provocative thought for your homework. Look at the world around you today, or even look back at other eras in history. What other movements could connect to these ideals? Who else has stood up and used the foundational promises of equality and justice to demand a completely better world? Take this knowledge, apply that moral compass, and honestly, I cannot wait to see what you discover. Keep learning, keep seeking justice, and I'll see you in the next explainer.